Morning, everyone. I am Loretta McNary, and it is my esteemed pleasure to welcome you to the 2021 MMBC Continuum's Virtual Economic Development Forum, and also to introduce and bring up Madam President Joselle Luster Booker.
Welcome to the 2021 MMBC Continuum's Virtual Economic Development Forum, the new reality, the journey to recovery and resiliency for businesses and communities. We apologize, we've started our morning because we are live with a bit of technical difficulty, but please bear with us as we get started. Business operations worldwide across every industry sector were disrupted as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Some faced unprecedented financial and workforce losses, while others were able to pivot, innovate, and transform. The lives of people across the globe were impacted by loss, renewal, and recovery. The strength of the human spirit was tested, and the grit and grind of people around the globe has demonstrated the resiliency born out of acknowledging we are living in a new reality. Now, for-profit, nonprofit, and public and private organizations upended by the pandemic are focused on their greater communities and are using their resources to meet the needs of people in the communities they serve. From Memphis, Tennessee, we are pleased to present the virtual 2021 Economic Development Forum. Over the next 2 days, we have designed a virtual experience like none other. You will hear from global, national, and local thought leaders sharing data and facts to address issues resulting from the impact of the pandemic and providing strategies and resources necessary to prepare you for this recovery and resiliency journey. Each day, the networking lounge will open to connect and engage with conference attendees. We ask you visit the information desk to view the event agenda, the digital program book, which contains sponsor ads, and to seek assistance if necessary. But before you leave the lobby, hear from our sponsors at any time throughout the conference by clicking on their logos on the banners. On this platform, you will be able to connect and interact with presenters and attendees via text, voice, and/or video chat, making this a safe and effective networking venue. Over the next 2 days, we encourage you to take full advantage of this opportunity, which is providing you direct access to the presenters and attendees via the various chat mediums. We are delighted to have you join us in this virtual setting. We hope you enjoy this event as much as we have enjoyed preparing it for you. You don't want to miss one single event, session, or speaker. So stay close to your virtual device and take us with you as you go about your day, today and tomorrow. So here we go. If you are just joining us and joining in for the keynote presentation, Building the Resilient Organization, welcome. We are beginning day one with Christine Selph with Deloitte Global. Christine is Director of Global Communications. In her role, she leads the development and promotion of signature research and thought leadership for Deloitte, including the CXO Resilience Survey, released at the World Economic Forum in Davos each year, the annual Global and Millennial Gen Z Survey, the inaugural Women at Work Global Outlook. Christine has been with Deloitte for 12 years and has worked in a variety of communications roles, including executive and corporate communications, internal and change management communications, and public relations. Prior to Deloitte, she worked for a digital media company in London and at CBS News in New York and Chicago as a writer and field producer. She has a master's degree in international and public affairs from Columbia University and a bachelor's degree in political science from the College of the Holy Cross and a certificate in French from the Sorbonne in Paris. 2021 virtual EDF attendees, I am pleased to present Miss Christine Selph. Christine, welcome.
Well, thank you so much, Joselle. This is such a pleasure to be here, and I'm so excited to share with you all some of the findings from 2 pieces of thought leadership that Deloitte has released this year. I hope that you will find it relevant and useful as you start to rebuild after the devastating year that we've had. And as our global CEO, Puneet Renjin, likes to say, we shouldn't aim to just go back to how things were prior to the pandemic, but rather view 2020 as an opportunity to build back better in your companies and your organizations, with your employees, and in your wider communities. So for the past 4 years, Deloitte has been surveying C-suite executives around the world on issues most pressing to them. Our first few surveys focused on technology and the rapid pace of change that technology was bringing to everything from business strategy to and operations to the workforce. Then in 2020, the world basically came to a standstill. And COVID-19 shifted businesses' priorities. And so for 2021, we decided to shift our focus for the survey to explore this broader concept of resilience or resiliency. We surveyed 2,260 C-suite executives in 21 countries to understand how organizations were coping with these unexpected challenges. And also, we wanted to tap into their opinions about what made their organizations more or less able to withstand chaos. We wanted to understand those traits that business leaders everywhere, including yourselves, could emulate to build greater resilience in their and your own organizations. We found, and so why focus on resilience? So we found that resilient organizations outperform in times of disruption. Global leaders who said that their organizations had done well cultivating resilient cultures were 3 times more likely than those lacking resilient cultures to say that they had weathered the events of 2020 well. We also found that resilience is deliberate. So CXOs and everyone might not know what those threats are that are looming and when they appear, but they can design organizations that are more likely to withstand and prosper through disruption. And leaders of resilient organizations understand that these traits are not immutable and they don't just occur organically. They require desire, effort, investment, and action to cultivate and maintain. I'm going to get to the traits in a moment. On the next slide, this is just a snapshot of those organizations that we surveyed. As I said, it was 2,260 private and public sector CXOs in 21 countries. For the report, we also spoke to C-suite executives across multiple industries to really examine how they and their organizations were grappling with this new normal. And as they face these tough choices, explore new ways of operating and confront fundamental shifts in their strategies. So on the next slide, CXOs do not believe that that disruption is going away. And in fact, over half believe that we are likely to see occasional disruptions of the magnitude of 2020 in the near future. And 10% say that we're likely to see regular or ongoing disruptions of this nature, be it cyber attacks, God forbid, another health pandemic, even climate-related disruptions, which we've been seeing recently here in the US and abroad. In fact, 3 in 4 CXOs that we spoke with indicated that they believe climate change will be a crisis of at least a similar, if not greater magnitude to the events of 2020. So disruption isn't going away, and therefore that's why it's critical that everyone in the business world kind of understands what traits it takes to become a resilient organization for the future. 2020 really held organizations' feet to the fire, if you will, and it was a prod that many needed to fast track technologies and processes that they had kind of begun to sow the seeds for, but perhaps had not gotten around to actually implementing to a greater degree. Before 2020, only 24% of CXOs felt completely ready to lead through potential disruptions, and only 21% felt confident that their organizations could quickly adapt and pivot if needed. Interestingly, then during the pandemic, those numbers jumped to 34% and 30% respectively, which indicates that the events of 2020 had given CXOs some degree of confidence in their ability to lead during a disruption. But that still leaves 66% of CXOs across industries that do not feel ready to lead and do not feel confident in their organization's ability to withstand disruptive events. If we go to the next slide, so I wanted to talk to you about the specific traits that we found, organizations that were able to weather the storms possessed. The first trait is preparedness. So most CXOs plan for all eventualities, both long-term and short-term. We found that more than 85% of the CXOs that we surveyed, whose organizations successfully balance short and long-term priorities, felt that they had pivoted very effectively to adapt to the events of 2020, whereas fewer than half of the organizations without that balance felt the same. Our previous reports have consistently shown the benefits of long-term thinking, and this year is no different. Organizations that anticipate, plan, and have comprehensive playbooks ready to roll almost certainly will be the most resilient. And when we asked leaders to tell us the key actions they'd already taken or were planning to take across a number of areas, those that were actively planning investments in these processes prior to 2020. We call them the pace setters, excuse me. They're indicated in the dark green on the slide. They indicated stronger performance compared with their competitors who hadn't yet taken these resilient actions. And they're the ones that are in the light green on the slide. So for example, those that had invested in technology that supports remote working prior to 2020 were 40% more inclined to say that they had weathered the events of 2020 better than their peers versus those that hadn't invested in those technologies. And likewise, those who provided employees with flexible working options prior to the pandemic were 32% more likely to have weathered the pandemic versus those that didn't. So it's clear that from the report that leaders still struggle to move beyond this kind of short-termism and ad hoc approach to developing strategies. Across the board, organizations that put these resilient components in place prior to 2020 were in the minority. So if you are in the minority right now, you are not alone, and we're going to talk about ways that you can continue to build. So preparedness is the first trait. On the next slide, adaptability. So adaptability might be one of the most obvious of the 5 resilient characteristics, but it's also perhaps one of the most difficult to achieve. So being adaptable means, for example, having the technology and the processes in place to, say, handle increased online orders when physical locations cannot serve customers, or developing employees whose skills are transferable. So if their particular job is endangered, they can assume different duties within the company. Leaders recognize the importance of having versatile employees, especially after a year like 2020. And to that end, flexibility and adaptability were by far the workforce traits CXOs said were most critical to their organization's futures. 44% listed it as one of their top 3 choices, almost twice as many as those that said expertise and proficiency in their roles or technologically savviness. The ways companies develop their people, not surprisingly, has a huge impact on their ability to adapt quickly to the circumstances. And again, those CXOs who had invested early on in their workforces, so implementing processes to be able to redeploy workers, training programs to reskill them, or providing flexible working options, were far more likely to say that they had resilient cultures than those that had no plans to make these workforce investments. The next trait is collaboration. Collaboration is an important element of resilience because it both leads to greater innovation and it also allows companies to avoid the blind spots. So for instance, when a well-connected company feels stress in one area, say supply chain, the sales department can anticipate and react to the eventual effect that that will have on customer fulfillment. Insular organizations often struggle making those adjustments, which hampers their ability to react successfully to disruptive events. CXOs indicated the importance of collaboration within their organizations, noting that it sped decision-making and it led to more innovation. In fact, removing those silos and increasing collaboration was a top strategic action that CXOs took during this time. Technology played a critical role in enabling collaboration during last year's shift to virtual work. Again, those organizations that had the technology put in place to 2020 were actually in the minority, only 22% of the sample. Yet 79% of those said that they could quickly adapt and respond to the disruptive events. Lot of talk lately about the shift to remote work. And I think that is here to stay. At 32%, the number of CXOs who believe remote work will persist once the pandemic is over has fallen slightly from the all-time high of 58% during the pandemic, but it's still 14 points higher than before the start. So 14% of CXOs now think that virtual work will be more pervasive in their workforces going forward. The next trait, trustworthiness. So we conducted another survey called the annual Millennial survey. And this survey year upon year has shown us that trust in businesses, government, media, and other kind of establishments and institutions has eroded over the past decade. The majority of younger people no longer feel that these institutions are ethical, competent, or socially conscious. However, we know that trust is actionable. Leaders can instill and build trust in their stakeholders in both certain and uncertain times by considering their needs. This slide in front of you examines the actions that CXOs took across 3 dimensions of trust: physical, emotional, and digital, and the effect that those actions had on their ability to adapt and pivot in response to the pandemic. And we found that the organizations that were able to successfully cultivate these elements of trust were better prepared. So in terms of physical trust, the physical safety of employees and customers is central to any appropriate response and reentry strategy. About 3 in 4 CXOs said that their organizations had done well in keeping employees and customers physically safe. And around 2 and 3 said that they had maintained employee morale and trust between leadership and employees. That still leaves a quarter of CXOs who felt that their organizations could have done more to protect their people and their customers. From an emotional trust standpoint, the COVID-19 pandemic in many cases has ushered mental health into the forefront of public consciousness. However, 40% of CXOs felt that mental health or stress resources that their organizations provided to their employees were not adequate. And then there's digital trust. That rush to remote working that came with the pandemic led many organizations to worry about cybersecurity issues. Yet only 54% of CXOs felt that their organizations had done well or very well managing evolving cybersecurity threat detection and prevention. And then our final trait is responsibility. So I think today there is a broad acknowledgement that the business world has a responsibility beyond just making money and the bottom line. Stakeholders expect institutions to align their actions to a higher and a more meaningful purpose and put the needs of customers, employees, and their communities, and also the planet at the forefront. From a resilience standpoint, 87% of CXOs who said that they had done a good job balancing those needs between their stakeholders also felt that their organizations were able to pivot and adapt well to the events of 2020. That's 50 points higher than those CXOs that said that they weren't doing a good job balancing the needs of their stakeholders. Cultivating a reputation for being a responsible business, both as an employer as well as a force for good in the world, and backing that reputation with real action is a strong indicator of resilience across a number of areas. Authentic organizations, so those with reputations for valuing their employees, helping communities, and being transparent with stakeholders regarding environmental, societal, governance, ESG issues, are more likely to score highly on key resilience indicators. On the next slide, the disruptive events of 2020 are reflected in the top societal issues selected by CXOs as areas for business to tackle over the next decade. Climate change was named most often. This year, it was the #1 choice of societal concerns by a 5-point margin. Perhaps unsurprisingly, healthcare and disease prevention took the #2 spot this year, higher than it has ranked in the past. Societal issues involving inequality round out the remaining top 5, including gaps in education, income inequality, and systematic bias. I think this emphasis also reflects the times, as those who lag in education and income and face discrimination are suffering disproportionately in this current environment. When we ask the top 5 actions business leaders have taken as part of their environmental sustainability activities, as well as their efforts to alleviate systematic bias, a third of CXOs indicated that their organizations are training employees to be more environmentally sustainable, and many are designing products or services in more sustainable ways. To alleviate systematic bias and inequalities, 44% said that their organizations have fired employees for racist comments or actions, and many are discussing this topic at the board level and requiring diversity training. So in conclusion, for this section, I think there is no one-size-fits-all approach to resilience because every disruptive event is different. But the approaches that we describe in the report and what we've just talked about better position an organization to respond to incidences that are out of its control. There absolutely are actions that business leaders like yourselves can start taking today as a starting point to develop resilient traits that you will need in the future. So a couple of those from this list. Companies can cultivate preparedness by building up their crisis response capabilities, including creating playbooks and hosting regular crisis simulations. Leaders can make companies more adaptable by shifting from hiring talent for specific skill sets to hiring for specific mindsets, like flexibility and adaptability. This might mean rethinking job descriptions and education requirements and developing training or rotational programs to cultivate a resilient workforce. While removing internal silos across functions and levels is key to increasing collaboration and building organizational resilience, organizations can help themselves by ensuring they've invested in the technologies needed to facilitate that collaboration. Remember that trust is actionable. CXOs should focus on ensuring that there's a plan in place to maintain or develop physical, emotional, and digital trust. Organizations should not wait for a crisis to occur to start building up those trust currencies. And finally, there are many ways to be a responsible business, from having environmental sustainability initiatives in place, to providing adequate pay and benefits to workers, to prioritizing mental health, wellness, and diversity and inclusion. The most responsible and resilient organizations focus on many of these areas at once. So even if 2020 is an anomaly, the actions that strengthen resilience will serve companies well in good times and in challenging ones. There's no downside to having a nimble strategy, adaptable culture, or accommodating technology. Organizations that do will be better prepared for the future, both long-term as well as short-term surprises. So that is our first report. And now we're going to go to our next report that I also thought was very relevant to this group. So speaking of prioritizing diversity, inclusion, and inequality within your workforce, we conducted another survey during the pandemic of 5,000 women worldwide called Women at Work, a Global Outlook. And as you begin to think about your own companies as you emerge from the pandemic, it's critical to understand how female employees are feeling and what you as an employer can do to help. So let's play another video. I apologize. I understand that you couldn't hear the last video, so that was probably technical difficulties on my end, but I'm going to try and fix them for this.
We've endured more than a year of isolation, anxiety, uncertainty, and disruption. Life throughout the COVID-19 pandemic has been universally tough, but women in particular have found themselves in a perfect storm. They're burdened with more work, more family responsibilities, more challenges. It's taken a toll. Almost half have considered leaving the workforce completely. Imagine a workplace with nearly 50% fewer women. Since COVID-19 started, women feel less optimistic about their career prospects. Many aren't satisfied with their jobs, and they don't feel like their employers have helped them balance work with other commitments. A majority of women have also experienced non-inclusive behaviors at work, being addressed in disrespectful ways, or having their judgment questioned. And it's worse for women of color and LGBT+ women. A quarter who experience these behaviors don't report them to their employers, fearing it will hurt their careers. We can all do better. We must do better. Emerging from this pandemic, we must ensure that women have the same opportunities to succeed personally and professionally. Learn from the organizations that are getting it right, where gender equality and inclusion are the cultural norm. Together, we can create workplaces that are fit for a brighter future.
Okay, great. If we could go back to the presentation, I just have a few slides to share with you on this report. So it's estimated that the pandemic has caused a loss of over 114 million jobs worldwide, the majority of which have been lost by women across industries. Unfortunately, our survey underscored this reality that women have been disproportionately affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. With mounting home and work responsibilities, many have been forced into difficult decisions, like reducing their paid working hours or leaving the workforce altogether. Women across 10 countries told us that the pandemic is creating a perfect storm where they are feeling pressure from all sides in their professional and personal lives. If you go to the next slide. So over 3/4 of the women that we surveyed said that their workload at work has gone up since March 2020. If you could just go to the next slide, Brittany, thank you. At the same time, women are taking on even more responsibility at home. 59% are spending more time on household tasks than they did prior to the pandemic, and 35% are spending more time caring for children. So this mounting 360-degree pressure is putting a strain on their work-life balance and their well-being. And perhaps it's no surprise then that only 44% are actually satisfied with their current jobs, and just over half feel motivated at work. On the next slide, the reality is that women's career trajectories are at risk of stalling, which of course may impact future generations. Just over half of the women that we surveyed feel less optimistic about their careers since the pandemic began. And at 57%, this number is even higher for women of color. Many women are feeling frustrated, and a significant number are considering leaving the workforce for good. Just 39% think that their organization's commitment to supporting them during the pandemic has been sufficient. Less than a quarter say that their employers have enabled them to create clear boundaries between work and personal hours. 63% feel that their employers evaluate them based on the amount of time that they spend online rather than the quality of their output. And over half have experienced non-inclusive behaviors. Things, as the video said, like having their judgment questioned, their communication style ridiculed, getting fewer opportunities to speak in meetings than their male counterparts. And women of color and LGBTQ+ women experience non-inclusive behaviors even more frequently. On the next slide, indeed, many women are discouraged by their employer's commitment to gender equality. However, approximately 4%, so not a lot, of women from our survey indicate that they work for organizations that seem to be getting it right. These organizations have built inclusive, flexible, and high trust cultures that support women. We've deemed these organizations the gender equality leaders, and they have created environments where women feel confident reporting non-inclusive behaviors. They feel supported by employers in balancing work and home commitments, and they believe that their careers are progressing as fast as they would like. The benefits of an inclusive culture are clear and inspiring. Women who work at these leader organizations report higher levels of productivity, mental well-being, and job satisfaction. than those women who work at, quote, lagging organizations. So in conclusion to this survey, our research shows that shows what organizations must do if they want to make a real difference on gender equality at work and helping those women post-pandemic to succeed. So that involves creating and maintaining an inclusive everyday culture where non-inclusive behaviors are not tolerated and where women feel able to raise concerns without fear of career penalty. Organizations that enable work-life balance that goes beyond just policies and really normalizes flexible work. Those that demonstrate visible leader commitment, including setting targets for gender representation at the senior level. Offering employees better learning and development opportunities, interesting projects, and stretch assignments that work for women. And finally, providing support and resources such as short-term sabbaticals and mental health resources that enable life outside of work. So as we start to rebuild the workplace post-pandemic, it is incumbent upon employers to rebuild the way that we work with gender equality in mind, a workplace that works for all and that truly is fit for the future. And with that, I will end my formal presentation, and I am happy to take any questions that you might have.
Well, Christine, what I'd like to do is talk for a moment about the findings of that study. There was a lot of interesting information, especially in the first study, the one focused on resiliency. And I'm wondering, although you gave the study sample and from the global perspective of the companies that were interviewed and that participated in that study, we are hosting this event today here in Memphis, Tennessee. A lot of our audience and attendees are small businesses. Can you talk a moment about how transferable the information and the findings of your study are to businesses, regardless of their size and regardless of their industry, as it relates to preparing for the next disruption?
Yes, sure, absolutely. I mean, I think all of the traits that we presented in the study are very transferable regardless of the size. I mean, I understand that in a smaller organization, there are fewer resources, and it might be more difficult to perhaps run a cyber simulation with offices from all over, and making sure that they're protected against cyber attacks, as one example, or involving or unveiling a huge training and development program that the likes of a larger organization might put together. But I still think that the traits that we presented, when you think about your own organization, and how things like flexibility, trust, how can you think about those in terms of your own industry and your own workforce? Everyone, regardless if you're working for a company with 10 people, a company with 100 people, a company with 10,000 people, everyone wants to feel valued and feel like their organization really cares about them and cares about their safety, and making sure that they are taking into account things. For example, as we come back into the office, they want to feel that their organization cares. And so I think a lot of times where companies, including the largest ones, kind of misstep is not communicating effectively about what they are doing. So if you have put in place, let's just take the back to the office example. So if you have put in place certain protocols where the desks are set up at a certain length, or there's partitions set up, or you're only allowing a certain number of people up in an elevator, or things like that. Communicate to that to the employees prior to them coming back, so that they know that you sat down and you actually thought about it and cared about their safety before kind of bringing them all back. I mean, that's just one small example, but I think that communication is key. Also, in the sense of the training and development opportunities. I think everybody wants to feel, that if they would like to, that they can get involved in different projects in the organization, that there's an upward path for them. And so not only is it good for them personally to feel challenged and to feel like they can expand the horizons, but as we saw from the study, having that workforce that is adaptable and flexible. And when something comes down the pike saying, we don't act, I can give you an anecdote, actually. We spoke with someone at a bank, and when all the branches closed during the pandemic, they had all these tellers that they no longer needed to go into a physical location. But rather than furloughing them or laying them off, they were able to pivot to an area that was very important and needed during that time, which was fielding calls about the PPP loans. And so by providing those employees with transferable skills, not siloing them into the jobs that they were hired for, but giving them those opportunities, I absolutely believe that, again, no matter what size your organization is, that sort of thing is good for your employees, and it's good for your overall organization.
Response to that first question transitioned into another question that I wanted you to talk a little more about. If you had any type of responses from some of the participants as it related to hiring for skills and traits, which is a different way of hiring individuals. Because in many small organizations, people have jobs that are assigned specifically to single individuals. And what we found in this disruption, that for whatever reason, individuals within that company exited the workforce, it left huge gaps within those organizations to fill those roles. So what did your research show regarding those resilient organizations that had already started hiring for skills and traits, as opposed to the traditional way organizations hire employees?
Yeah, sure. So again, I realize that not every organization has, thousands of employees, and if one person leaves, there's somebody else that can kind of quickly take their place. But again, I think you underscore an important point. If there's only one individual in your organization with only one set of skills and something happens, that person leaves, or God forbid gets ill, or whatever the reasoning might be, then you're really in a difficult position. Whereas a lot of organizations set up kind of succession lines. So in other words, there'll be a person who is kind of responsible for a certain vertical, and that is their role. But then there will be one or two other people that might not do the role on a daily basis, but who have kind of knowledge of that area. And so if needed, they could step in and maybe with a little training and oversight, certainly pick it up quickly. But I think, again, having that bench, if you will, from a sports perspective, if you have that bench who just has, a number of skills that are transferable. And it's also a mindset too. I think sometimes you might hire people that are very comfortable in their role. This is what they have been trained to do. Perhaps they got an education in this role and they feel very comfortable. And so when you come to them and you say, I need you to look into or start doing things in this other role, or I need you to gain new skills, I think sometimes that can make them very uncomfortable. And some people love that and they want to learn more. And this whole idea about lifelong learning and constantly evolving and being challenged, I think is absolutely something that a lot of employees want. But I guess in a smaller organization, especially, you have to recognize that there's other employees that might make them a little uncomfortable. You telling them that they need to learn new skills. So again, I think it's the way that you communicate it to them. And it's not about, taking away their jobs or not finding value in what they've been doing all these years, but it's about setting them up and as well as the organization up for success. So when these disruptions do happen in the future, and we know that they will, everybody is in a better position to succeed and to be able to benefit themselves and also the organization.
Another thing I'd like to ask, as it relates to small businesses, we've talked about small businesses, and as they look at this report and they look to ways that they can fortify their own companies to prepare them against disruption. You mentioned slightly ESG, environmental, social, or sustainability and governance. That may seem like an overwhelming topic to small businesses, but it is a very important element of building a resilience plan. But at the same time, there was other data that you shared about Gen Z and millennials, and we know that the inputs and the strategies that are included in those reports are very important to those demographic populations. But what would you say to small businesses about the importance of incorporating and creating ESG strategies and policies for their organizations?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've run this Millennial and Gen Z survey for 10 years now, and practically every year that I can remember, the environment has come up as the #1 concern that these young people have with respect to the world. And they absolutely make employer decisions as well as consumer decisions, who they buy from as consumers, based on a company's environmental policies. So if they don't agree with your policies, if there have been negative news outlets out there that say that you do things that are not sustainable or not environmentally friendly, then they will not want to work for a company like that. On the flip side, if you are able to articulate, well, first of all, strategize, come up with a strategy around your environmental goals, and then communicate them, then you will be in a much better position, I think, to attract and retain those employees, those customers. I know that ESG metrics are increasingly important to regulators and things like that, people like that. So I think it's absolutely a critical goal. Now, don't feel nervous if you haven't started to think about sustainability yet and environmental concerns, because I know with a small business, you have so many things that you are trying to build up, and it's really difficult. But you know what? Start small. I mean, you'll be surprised, because we've asked the biggest companies in the world, the actions that they've taken. And even you saw in the slide that I presented, they are training employees to be more sustainably focused. They are trying to some extent to change, perhaps the packaging of their products or things like that. But only 30% are doing that. So it's not like everyone out there is doing a great job with this. There is still so much that companies need to be doing with respect to the environment. And I think, all the way from the big companies down, it shows that everybody is kind of in the beginning stages, I think. So don't feel embarrassed or, nervous about it. I think just start somewhere. I mean, start with the recycling bins in your cafeterias. Start with maybe having a cleanup day. That's something that Deloitte does. We have a annual impact day, and a lot of people will go to the local schools, churches, beaches, and clean up. Whatever it might be. And then, of course, if you can, if your building is environmentally friendly, or if you can change the light bulbs, little things like that. I think it's just starting small. But the biggest thing for me is about communicating that to your stakeholders, to your employees, to your potential employees, and to your customers, showing that you care about the environment, you understand that they care about the environment, and you are starting in your own way to make steps, in the positive trajectory.
I'm going to ask again, do we have any questions in the chat to our participants? I think we have an excellent opportunity here to talk with a global thought leader that has put this report together that was actually, you heard earlier, that was presented at the Global Forum. So, Christine, one last thing. Do you have any parting words for our audience today before?
I guess my main parting words might bring back what I brought up in the beginning part of the discussion, and it's just understanding that 2020 was a traumatic year for everyone around the globe. But looking at it again as much as you can as an opportunity now to kind of reset and rebuild. That doesn't mean raising everything and starting from scratch, but I think that, kind of taking stock of maybe things that weren't working in the past and utilizing this as an opportunity to make some changes, and to just, rejig and think about, how can I make sure that I am supporting my employees in the ways that they need it? How can I ensure that I'm being a friend to the environment? How can I ensure, that my technology is up to speed? So if we do ever get into a situation where we're kind of, forced away from the office again, that it won't take us so long to kind of get up to speed, providing those flexible working opportunities. So I think it's just a matter of kind of not necessarily dwelling on the past, but thinking forward and thinking about how to rebuild in perhaps a better way.
Thoroughly covered the resilience report. Also, there was a lot of statistical information and information that I'm sure will spur conversations for the remainder of the day. And as information that you've presented is shared and reviewed more closely, the women at work information that you shared and how this pandemic has impacted women who had households, raised children. So many of them, as I'm sure some of our participants that are participating that may be working remotely now, that when school was in session, not only did they work remotely, they had children that were home learning while they were working, and they still had to take care of the other household duties, and just the stress and the pressure that have been placed on so many women during this pandemic. I'd like to ask at this time, are there any questions from our viewers, specifically regarding the information that Christine shared about women at work? Shy group today, Christine, as it relates to questions, as it relates to questions in the chat. But one thing that I will say is that Memphis was recognized as a city for women in business. And so I'm sure that information, I was hoping, would really resonate with some of the women business owners that are working and running their businesses. So not only are they women in the workforce, but these are women that, again, working from home, raising children, but also running their own business. and trying to get their businesses established. Any parting words as it relates to the women at work? Number one, for those that are running businesses, and two, for those that may not be business owners, but are in the workforce and working remotely and balancing all of the other issues and challenges associated with life.
Yeah. Well, I guess for the second group, I would say, please know that you are not alone. We are all struggling right now. It is really, really a tough time. There is so much coming at us, and the fact that we're responsible for so much more at home, and our work responsibilities have not increased. In fact, as you saw from the slides, for a lot of us, they've increased. It's, I think it's important to just understand, first of all, that you're not alone. The second thing is that as an employee, I think it's important to find organizations that support where you feel supported. And, perhaps that's where you're currently working, or perhaps it's not. And so I think, and on the flip side, from an employer perspective, I think women are starting to take stock of that. And so again, if you kind of feel like you've been lagging on a lot of these elements that we talked about in the presentation, the maybe the diversity and inclusion, trainings and makeups, the allowance for flexible work, the ability to take on new projects and be challenged where women might like to do that. If you've kind of been hesitating or not making that a priority, I do think that the women in your workforce are going to start to think about that, and make sure that they're working at the best place that meets their needs, and all of that. But not to put it on a negative note, but I do think that it's really important that women take care of themselves, and that they feel supported by their employers. And so for those business owners and for those employers, again, this opportunity to take stock. I've heard of a lot of organizations running small polls. It doesn't have to be a big thing, just a Survey Monkey poll, if you will. And it's about, a lot of them did it with respect to remote working and finding out how many of their employees would still like the opportunity to work remotely. But even beyond that, maybe just a poll, an anonymous poll about if they felt and feel supported right now. And if not, what are some things that you can do as employers to help them feel more supported? I think hearing from employees directly is so critical right now. So I think that's one of the biggest takeaways. And then I'll share one other anecdote. We did a similar session with a group out in California of business leaders. And one woman was saying that she was feeling disheartened because her company had announced that everyone was to come back to the office, no exceptions. And it was kind of abrupt. They were told that, on a 1 week, and they were due back in the office next week. And I think, it's really critical to understand that this past year, it's taken a full year and 4 months for us to kind of be where we're at right now in the pandemic, and to flip a switch and expect everyone, especially women, to just be able to jump right back into how things were pre-pandemic. I think you have to understand, like, that's incredibly difficult and really disheartening. And so she, as a boss, was having to deal with her employees feeling incredibly disheartened. And she was feeling it the same way. She had young children at home and felt like it was very harsh. So again, I know a lot of the companies on the line here are small, and you might not have the flexibility, to have everybody working remotely or flexibly. But I would just say, be empathetic to people's situations, and understand that certain people are just going to need more time and more support to kind of be able to be the employee that they want to be. They want to, they want to work for you. They want to do a good job. They want to progress. But there's so much going on right now in people's lives. And so just being patient with that.
All right. Well, listen, Christine, we have a couple of minutes remaining, and I do want to give people that may have that burning question or comment that they'd like to make the opportunity. You can use the raise your hand feature and ask a question yourselves.
And while we're waiting for those, I just put into the chat a link to the first video that I shared that unfortunately I forgot to share the sound on. So feel free to watch that at your leisure. It just kind of gives a quick summary of those 5 traits.
Okay. No hands raised. Well, again, Christine, thank you for presenting this 2021 Deloitte Global Resilience Report. We will post the entire report to our website, and we can also share the slides. And thank you for presenting the Women at Work as well. So, and with saying that, we are so pleased to have been able to present this information to businesses across the Mid-South and to those other businesses that are participating around the US. We know the COVID-19 pandemic will not be the last disruption. However, we believe it is extremely important for executives and business owners to not only know the 5 attributes of a resilient organization, but to also examine and assess your own organization so that you can adjust, pivot, invest, and implement the necessary systems, processes, and protocols to allow you to withstand the next disruption. It is our hope you, the attendees, will do just that. And I'll be right back after the break with the fireside chat with Della Clark, President and CEO of the Enterprise Center. Thank you.